Welcome to Have You Heard, where we talk about issues at the intersection of agriculture and engineering. Let's get started. Here are your hosts, Morgan Hayes and Josh Jackson.
Welcome. This is the Have You Heard podcast. This is episode 30. We're live streaming today from the University of Kentucky Beef Research and Education Unit here at Woodford County Farm. And we're going to talk a little bit today about farmstead layouts, both the work that we were doing here this morning as well as the work that we do in terms of planning layouts on our farms at home. Just to get started, I'm Morgan Hayes, an assistant professor in Biosystems and Ag Engineering at the University of Kentucky. I focus on livestock facilities, and in my personal life, my husband and I farm in Boyle County, Kentucky. We farm about 500 acres. It's a commercial cattle and hay operation.
I'm Josh Jackson, assistant professor in Biosystems agriculture engineering as well. I focus on precision livestock farming, and we raise my family raises registered Angus cattle and focus also on hay production.
Okay, Josh. So it's been another hot week. What's been happening on the farm this week? Give us a quick update.
So a quick update, we went ahead and we were able to get everything cut, and so all of our first cutting is finally done, all the hay. But we did get a little bit of that heavy rain that came through on Friday. However, it didn't really seem to affect us that much because it was probably about 5 minutes of heavy rain, almost like a heavy dew, and then it pretty much left. So it didn't seem like it was that bad. And plus, what we had down had just been cut Thursday.
Okay.
So it wasn't a huge concern for us. So it's all baled, all up, and so we've been also focused on still spreading some manure. Finally finished up. Most of our bush hogging's been done on any pastures with cattle, and so we also been focused on rotating our fall herd. So they've been rotating, working on weeding fence lines and cleaning up just around electric fence lines just to make sure everything functions effectively. How about yourself?
Yeah, so we also finished first cutting of hay. We actually have missed rain, so we missed rain last week on Monday. That came through the region, but we missed it, and then we missed it again on Friday. We didn't have any rain at the house at all. So we are getting very dry.
Yes.
It's definitely a stressor right now. It's very early in the season to be dry, and it looks like no rain for a few more days. So hopefully we get some rain in the near future. We're actually doing a little bit of second cutting right now. My husband's cutting some today, and it's merely because we're concerned that field, which is a heavy orchard grass clover field, is not handling this heat well. And to get any volume of any quality hay, we're just going to go ahead and do a second cutting early. And hopefully the clover will come back and maybe protect that orchard grass from some of this heat. But we need a little bit of rain for anything to grow at this point. So that's sort of our long-term goal is to do some second cutting in July, but we're going to go ahead and cut about 15 acres today just to get it knocked down. We still have a little bit of bush hogging left, although we've gotten the majority of that done. We continue to work on getting the tractor that was had a major breakdown a couple weeks ago, getting that fixed. It is now going in the shop this week and getting worked on, which is good. We have other projects at home. We have a deck we're building, which is not farming related, but seems to be tremendously cumbersome in terms of both time and energy, bandwidth mentally. For me, it's a lot to get everything done. So that's where we're at right now. We're certainly busy.
Yes.
And there doesn't appear to be a major break in that busyness in the next few weeks. So no complaints, but definitely cranking away on just getting cattle rotated, being really cognizant with this dry weather about rotating judiciously, but not overgrazing anything right now.
Right, because we get to that point where it's dry and the grass could burn up on us, so you have to utilize what we can, but not destroy everything.
Yeah, and we have a couple fields that we clipped early because they were very tall, and they're sort of laying there on top of the surface, but we still have a good undergrowth in them. So we do have some grass stores if we need it, if it does stay dry for a few more weeks, but certainly that's a little bit more stressful as if we have a drought here early in summer. It makes the whole season a little trickier. But I'm sure we will get rain eventually here. We are not in a region of the world where we're likely to not get rain for months on end. So it's just a matter of waiting it out at this point, which is okay. Let's talk a little bit, though, about our topic of the day, which was sort of farmstead planning, layouts, things like that. We spent the morning out here recording some videos for an extension project we're working on. We talked about fencing, we talked about turning radiuses on gravel drives for trucks and trailers, talked about handling facilities and the layouts of those. Lots of different topics that we recorded on, but just as a general rule, all of them sort of fall into what I would consider generally farmstead layout, farmstead planning, which is an awesome topic and one we don't typically touch on because it's not a seasonal one, so it's not one that we think to put into our rotation, but it's something we're continuously doing on our farms.
Yeah, and like, most of the extension visits we go on is actually more farmstead planning, farmstead layout, facility planning. And so part of it, we come in and think about the first thing we try to think about when you approach a facility is just accessibility. Accessibility from the road, back to the fields, and then thinking about from there, how do you want to, are you centering your animals to one concentration point, multiple concentration points throughout the farm? What makes the most sense, I think, is what we try to initially approach. And that's the way I initially approach it anyway.
Yeah, I agree. I think, there's an accessibility for both vehicles,
Yep.
humans, and cattle, at least on our farms because we have cattle. I'm sure the goats and the alpacas also need some form of accessibility, but they don't take very many acres, and usually they're close enough to the road that we can get to them for the most part. So those are our big ones, but part of the challenge is making decisions about where to place things and where to invest in the infrastructure. And this is a ongoing debate, I think, on both of our operations.
Yeah, and some of it's you have existing infrastructure, and then working at like, do we need a clean slate, or do we need to try to use what we have? And so it's some of that balancing act, trying to maintain, and it all comes down to when you start considering those aspects, somewhat comes down to cost, cost considerations and feasibility, and we try to really think about, if we're trying to reuse a barn, is it tobacco barn? Is it structurally sound? And then if it is yes, do we need to add additions? Do we need to add a lean-to or something like that to make it more functional for us? Or do we just wipe the slate clean and just put a new barn up? And in this economy right now, maybe wiping it clean is probably not most economically feasible.
Right.
But, in past years, that might have actually been a consideration.
Yeah, like a good example of this is, I went out and it sounds ironic because I went out and visited with your mom. She was putting in a winter feeding area and she wanted to cover it. And it was really a pretty good discussion we had about where that facility could be located. And I think I was there mainly as a neutral party in this case. But it's a really interesting discussion because, right, Josh and his mother and his brothers all work together on the farm and they all have different opinions, but you have to come to consensus about what makes sense. Josh's mom does the primary feeding of these cattle in this facility, so she's thinking about it from ease of her getting feed to these animals, what makes sense for the animals to have the least walk, to have the most comfortable spot. And Josh is concerned because he's got a hay barn at the same location. How do we get the hay from there into the feed pad area? And similarly, how do I also get my hay unloaded into the hay barn? I can't put this other barn in such a location that I cannot get into my hay barn. That's not a negotiable. So there's always a little bit of a dynamic, and different people on the farms have different priorities based upon their jobs. So some people who farm exclusively by themselves get to make the decisions 100% by themselves. But on both of our operations, there's strong opinions.
There's committees involved.
There are committees involved. There's voting. I just never win at the votes at my farm. That's how it works. I'm too flexible. It's the problem. But it is. I think it's a really interesting dynamic because everyone comes into that discussion with the perspective of the job that they do most often.
Yes.
And it's not that their opinion isn't valid if it doesn't agree with your opinion based upon the jobs you do on the farm, but sometimes it's hard to see someone else's the thoughts that they're having and their reasoning for it. So one of the things that I always really encourage people to do is to draw out their thoughts onto paper, either pull out a map and draw right onto a map, or put it into Google Earth Maps, or put it into something and show someone what you're thinking, and then the other people on the farm get to give you feedback that also work on the farm, and that way you sort of know what they don't like about your concept. But you have to be ready to listen for that to work, and I'm not always ready to listen if I'm being completely honest.
Yeah, that'd probably be the most difficult part, is the listening. But
Yeah.
we have to think about too, because that same barn was the simplest. I'm trying to think of the best way to put it, the thing we don't think about. So manure management is, I guess, the simplest thing, or not the simplest thing, but the most easily overlooked thing is actually the most important.
Yeah, and there is a lot of manure when animals eat in a barn continuously throughout the winter. It is not an insignificant source. In fact, we had pretty long discussions about it, because the ideal spot to store it is actually directly behind the hay barn, but
Yes.
that's not necessarily long-term the ideal location to maintain a stockpile of manure when it gets scraped before it gets spread. On the other hand, it's a graveled area, and it is not near a creek or water body, so there are some benefits. It's not the worst spot I've ever seen anyone stockpile before. But it's a challenge. That's one thing. We have a winter feeding area on our farm as an example, and we originally built it there, and it's a good location. It comes right off of a fence line. It's not a true fence line feeder, but it accesses from outside of the field, which means that the tractor doesn't ever have to get in the mud to feed hay, which is nice. The challenge is the manure then has to stockpile in the field with the animals in the wintertime. So we do have to then build a structure to hold the manure so the animals don't climb into the manure pile. Not really such a problem for the cows. They're not usually creative enough to do that. But the calves, if they're in there in the wintertime, are definitely creative enough to do that, and they can get stuck in it. So everything then has to be fenced off around it to give it sort of a secure containment to make that manure work.
And one of the challenges too you mentioned was I think earlier podcast was the skid steer went down this winter. So that was probably early in December, and so it was down for a good while. And so we probably didn't get it back till mid-March. And so that all that time we had designed that whole facility with a skid steer in mind for the primary aspect for putting out the hay and also cleaning it out.
Yeah.
And so at some point we ended up borrowing the neighbor's skid steer from down the road, Mr. Brogel, and we were able to borrow his, luckily, and put more hay out. And so we were able to keep feeding hay. Once we got our initial, we were able to clean it out and then put fresh hay in, and we were able to keep putting some more in, make it work. But there for a while, we were kind of just in a pinch.
Yep.
So, some of it's practical concerns of, okay, we put in this facility, designed it all around the skid steer, then the skid steer went down.
Right.
And so, at some point, we're like, do we rent one? We've got to have something here. And so we had to go back to putting out hay in the field for a little bit there. And so it was concern, how do we make this work? And so there's a lot of practical issues. And then when the skid steer does come back, it's a little wet. The manure spreader went down. So we're like, And so it just built and built and built. And so it wasn't quite ideal in that aspect. So we had a couple of different equipment issues. And so that's something we had to be cognizant of.
Yeah, we build ours to work on the skid steer, but we also have our smallest tractor, and we intentionally build it at a width where both the smallest tractor, our 50-horse tractor, and our skid steer are both feasible options. And they both are quick attach with a Bobcat style quick attach. They use the same implements. So we do have a bucket, and we do have a tire scraper that we can use for manure, but ideally we wouldn't put that on the 50-horse tractor. It's very heavy for the tractor. It's not ideal to run that with the tractor. The skid steer is far more adept at scraping manure, but from a practical standpoint, it does give us a little bit of redundancy in our equipment. And I don't know if we thought of that because you had a similar issue with another feeding facility that you had, or just someone else that I spoke with. One of the benefits of this job is that we see a lot of farms that work, and we also hear a lot of people give us suggestions of things that they wish they had done differently. So we get a wealth of information, which we really appreciate by doing farm visits. I've been very happy, with that part of our layout. The other thing that we've spent a lot of money on and a lot of time on in the last couple of years is accessibility for vehicles onto our farms, because our hay operation is our moneymaker. We've invested a lot of money in infrastructure for people to be able to come in and pick up hay, as well as deliver hay to us. Since we purchase some of our hay and we bale some of our hay and then we sell a bit of hay, we have a number of people and different size tractors, trucks, trailers, all sorts of things coming in and out, wagons, off of the farm. And just having what we have right now is a functional layout, and one that we can even get a semi in. We have long-term plans to further expand our hay storage and delivery setup with the gravel drives, which I'm
ample turnaround area.
we have to have ample turnaround area. Not only do we need ample turnaround area for ourselves and our equipment, but the reality is we have a lot of people that come onto the farm to pick up hay, and some of them are excellent at driving a trailer, and some of them are adequate. They have safely gotten on and off of the farm. So,
And the milk is still there.
well, the mailbox is nowhere near the hay, thank God, because otherwise it might not be there. But they've only clipped a couple posts on our hay barns, and that's because we have a very wide turning area. Right now, it's still a K-turn, and the plan is to further develop the area where we do our hay storage and actually put a loop in that allows people not to have to back up. That is always, just in case you were wondering, the best option if you're not sure about the driver. Turning is always easier as long as you give them enough radius to keep their wheels on the gravel. And inevitably, we made our gravel area bigger. This is not actually a fact. This is just my personal opinion. We made the gravel area wide enough that anyone could turn, because we originally had it was about 30 foot wide in front of the barns, maybe even 35. It's now about 55 foot wide in front of the barns. We've expanded it to give more area in front of the barns for people to pull their trailers to back and make their turns. And the bottom corner where they make the turn, you cannot keep someone out of it, because inevitably they will have a gooseneck and they will always pull so that the truck just touches the edge and then the trailer tires drive through the grass. WD, my husband, keeps suggesting that we're going to stick a post there in the ground just so someone hits it every time, and just put spikes on it to scrape up the side of their trailers to really help them learn the lesson of how to turn their trailer properly. But I don't think that's going to work, because we're still trying to sell hay and we're not looking to upset the purchasers of the hay. But the reality is that you could never make a big enough turning area, but you certainly can make it too small.
Yes.
And so we've been really cognizant, moving forward. We still have plans about making our turning radiuses right, investing in gravel, heavy use areas, which means putting down filter fabric and the proper gravel, and then maintaining it, which means we have to bring in gravel every few years just to add on to that pad. It is not an inexpensive process. It's not something that we take lightly, but part of our business is selling hay, and that means that we do have a lot of people traveling on and off of the farms, and so we have to invest in having access to that hay year round, and then also having the barns themselves be graveled so that they are dry.
That it can be a significant investment.
It is a significant investment, and it's sort of a continuous process. We have to talk all the time about where would we most need to invest in more gravel, in further expanding our access. We certainly have areas on the farm that could use gravel all the time. We are not in perfect shape. I don't want to suggest that, but for me, that's one of the areas in the farmstead planning is where can I put another hay barn that it's not in the way of the existing hay barns, that it doesn't make loading or unloading hay take longer than it currently does, and then does it affect our plan long term to be able to get vehicles on a loop to turn around rather than having to K-turn out of our driveway. And it sounds like a pretty minor issue, but it isn't. It's a very big one, because if you choose the wrong location for a new barn,
You're stuck with that decision for 30 years.
you make your turning radius incorrect on your gravel pad, the gravel pad is going to stay there. You're just going to have to make more gravel pad to fix the problem
Yeah.
that you created the first time by making the wrong decision. And it just takes a while to figure those things out. It takes a lot of discussion. Sometimes it means that we make someone else drive a truck or trailer for us. Not to throw my mother under the bus, but I'm going to throw her under the bus here today. She's a perfect person for us to put in a truck and trailer, and we say, go ahead and show us how you would turn out of here. And sometimes we're like, wow, that's not what we expected, because she doesn't drive a truck and trailer nearly as often. But she's capable of driving it. You know, she drives a hay wagon for us pretty often, but she doesn't usually drive a gooseneck trailer.
Yes.
So we put her in it and we see where she turns, and then we sort of have an idea. That's sorry, Mom. That's how we have a pretty good idea about how that's going to work, which is, you know, probably not everyone's cup of tea to sit their mother-in-law into a trailer and let them drive around. But it does give some insight to put someone into a trailer other than yourself and see how they would drive it, especially if you think you're running a farm where other people are going to access because you have sales or something else on the farm and other people are just driving on and off of your farm. The more access that you have, the more people you have, the more important it is to consider
How they're going to approach that.
how they're going to approach it and how they perceive that driveway. I don't know. I don't know if that's a farmstead planning or just a life lesson about studying people's odd behaviors, but it's a little bit of both, I think, John.
A little bit of both. I mean, we try to, because and that's the thing we try to avoid, because I have a biased. Well, whenever I ask Justin, it's a biased opinion because we're around each other so much. We kind of know what each other's. You know what to expect, and the other brother is the same. And so, getting an alternative, having Mom or somebody else do it is definitely gets an alternative opinion on how something will be approached.
Yeah, sometimes it's interesting too to also watch. This sounds weird. The vet is a very good driver, but the vet comes onto the farm and they pull into our driveways and turn in our driveways differently than we do.
Yes.
And it might be that they go on to so many different farms that they just have a plan when they go on, but they use our driveways and our turning areas differently than we tend to, and actually different than our hay customers tend to, because they're driving in and then sort of backing into the working facility where most people that drive onto our farm are driving in to pick up hay. And some of them like to turn first. Some people like to get set up, get loaded, and then turn around. And there's a little bit of everything. And so just sort of watching what people do really does give you a very different perspective. And then my husband will also tell you that sometimes I park in such a way that he can't figure out why I did what I did. But I have a reasoning. It's just not his reasoning. He was thinking he was going to get that tractor out, and I thought he was going to get that tractor out on the other barn.
Yeah.
And so I park to get it out of the way of the one barn, and he actually wanted to get in the other barn. And so we still sometimes, even with a 50-foot wide gravel drive in front, we still sometimes are in the way of where we need to be to make things as easy as possible.
For us, we have a service lot. So we pull everything into an area, and so we start servicing there. So whatever's closest to the barn is most important or has to be done. And kind of from there and to the right, we'll have stuff and have stuff on the left. So kind of scatter all around, but we try to keep one where we can make a loop in our one little field there, service lot. And so if you do have a hay wagon or something that has to have air or something, you can still pull in there and turn around if you have to.
And that's actually, there are some books and some recommendations about farmstead planning out there, and there's a really nice one from Midwest Plant Service that I really like. It's quite a bit older, but it's a download that's available to people. And one of the things it does talk about is having a service lot, an area that is both for parking trucks, trailers, so that you can get to them and access them because they're on gravel. And also it talks about having space to turn around. Typically, a lot of times fuel tanks and things like that will be right near it.
Yep.
It's just an area that is easily accessible. And a lot of times if you have a machine shop, it's also right near that area. It's sort of ideally situated. It's sort of centralized. It's not the most central point in the farm, but it is a critical point to making the farm access work. And it sounds silly, but the gravel areas and having enough of them and in the right areas makes a lot of processes easier. So for us, it's hay primarily, but it's both the unloading of the hay as well as the selling of hay. We talked a little bit about weird drivers and things, but when you're really trying to get hay in as quick as possible and trying to beat rain, if everything is built right and there's the right spots to turn around and you can really have a plan and a pathway, the speed at which you can do these things is much improved.
One thing we do have, so we don't have gravel. We have gravel kind of leaning towards the somewhat central point on one of our farms, but from there we kind of go to anywhere there's a stream crossing. So it's just sometimes it's strategic. We don't have it all the way or throughout the whole farm, but strategic locations.
Yeah.
We have gravel and a pipe, 12-inch pipe in the stream, just so we can cross easier.
Yep.
And so sometimes having strategic little, so it's not the whole thing, but just that little section, just
Absolutely.
to make life a little bit easier.
Yep, and I think it's farmstead planning is sort of a continuous process. That's the other thing I really want to hit on today. Is just it's not like we have one plan and it's the thing we're going to do for the next 20 years and it's never going to change again.
Yep.
The farm is adaptable, and it has to be. Certainly in today's market, it has to be very adaptable.
Yes. Never thought I'd have goats.
There you go. But it has to be like a continuously changing goal. Like there's always going to be new priorities. There's always going to be something that's going to move up the chain to a higher priority. But there's a lot of things that have to happen regardless in terms of farmstead planning. It's something that should be reviewed regularly.
So we kind of see it like ours is more of a we kind of see that gradual shift. And so for us is we have like annual and biannual meetings.
Family meetings.
Family meetings.
Yeah.
And so just to keep everybody on the path. And so sometimes like so strategic and tactical goals, I guess. So what can you do on daily basis? Cutting hay is kind of what we don't even think about cutting hay. So we know this has to be done when it has to be done. And we kind of have an order of what we do to cutting hay.
Yeah, we sort of do too. We sort of have a plan for the activities that happen annually every year, sometimes multiple times a year. Working cattle, cutting hay, those things we might have to announce when we're doing them and make sure everyone's aware that's going to be involved in the process ahead of time. But we can schedule those and they don't really require a lot of discussion. But major investments in infrastructure, which is what farmstead planning is really talking about, certainly requires discussion ahead of time. It is not something you want to do without having that discussion and also really evaluating the cost benefit on it.
Yeah, it's not something you do on a whim.
No, yeah, currently, we thought next goal was something else, but we've been, looking at what hay prices are doing right now, and we might put up a hay barn next year.
So we're kind of in the same boat. We're flopping back and forth between fence line and hay barn, just because hay barn we stored a bunch of hay outside last year, and I was like, it's not ideal if we're feeding hay in the structure.
Yep.
And so that was one goal, but then the other one was the fence line we just spent probably 12 man hours this weekend weeding the electric fence line so the cows could rotate.
Yep.
And so one had already tried to self-rotate. So I was driving through the hayfield. I'm like, what is she? Okay, so one was out.
Yep.
And so I was like, well, obviously the cows need to move.
Yep.
So, we spent 12 man hours. So I was like, if we spent that same time, or maybe 24 hours putting up fence, 24 man hours putting up fence, putting
Right.
up a fixed knot high woven wire.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. There's always a balancing act and making the decision about what is the next step and what's going to be your next priority. And it does change, and the costs on items changes and all these things change. So we sort of a continuous discussion that we have to have on our farms. And that doesn't mean that we have like all the solutions for how to have these conversations, because we don't. We struggle with them, similar to most of you that are farming and having them. But it's so important to have them, because otherwise I feel like we make the wrong decisions.
Yep. And you gotta live with them at that point. You
Yep.
know, once you make. And so you're like, why didn't I do that? Why didn't I do that? So it's worth the time. And sometimes, those tough discussions can bring up, things you might not have considered.
Yep. Just gotta listen.
Or you gotta justify your decision a lot more.
Yeah. I always like that. I think it's always good to have to justify a decision. I think that's a very healthy thing to do. So I think
It keeps you honest.
it does keep you honest, yeah. And so with that, I think maybe we'll end there for today and just briefly touch on what our plans are for the next week.
So, obviously experiencing some dry conditions, so making sure, checking on my second cutting of hay, if anything needs to be done. Repairing equipment is always taking place, and that'd be about it.
Yeah, we've got that second cutting of hay down, so that'll get put back up. Hopefully we will have at least a significant amount of the decking done, because that would be a major project off of our list that's taking up a bunch of time right now. Bush hogging, we have a couple fields I'd like to have done next week. We had a couple that got done this week. And then, of course, we still have repairs that are ongoing, and hopefully I have more positive outlooks on my tractor next week. And I think with that, we'll end for the day.
All right, take care.
Thank you.
Have You Heard is a production of the University of Kentucky College of Agriculture, Food and Environment, along with the Department of Biosystems and Agricultural Engineering. Discover what's wildly possible at ca.uky.edu.